Peterson. I am the chairman of the Jamestown Bar Association Memorial Committee. I'd like to call to order a special meeting to celebrate the lives of Clint Meeder and Thomas Dorey. The order of the day. I'm going to go off agenda briefly just to acknowledge the passing of two attorneys who were not members of the Jamestown Bar Association, whose paths we certainly have crossed over the past many years. One is Bert Dole, who died October 28, 2021. For those that were in the real estate world will remember Bert from Salamanca. And Tony Spann, who recently died on April 11th, 2022. And so we're going to have a moment of silence in memory of those two colleagues of ours. Thank you. As to the order of the day, I will be starting with celebrating the life of Clinton Meeder. I will read his obituary, and then we'll open up the floor to comments on his life. So glad Kurt's here to join us on behalf of the family. Thank you very much. And then once that concludes, we will do a similar fashion on Tom Dorey, where I will read the obituary, and then I have a few letters. I will read those, and then we'll open it up to the floor. And when it's all said and done, we'll have this transcribed and sent to the various family members. Clinton Meeder, 86, of Sherman, New York, died May 6, 2022. He was born September 1st, 1935, to Clifford Oscar and Vera Hewitt Meeder at the family homestead in Ripley, New York. A farmer and an attorney, he is survived by his wife of 62 years, Norma Thompson Meeder, two sons, Daniel B. and Kurt Meeder, and three grandsons. He donated his body to the University of Buffalo for biomedical science purposes. In addition, for the record, he graduated from Alfred State, Gannon University, and Cornell Law School. He also attended Cornell University for various periods of time as an undergrad. He was in the New York State Troopers, Troop A, for several years in East Avon. He graduated from Cornell in '65 and went to work with Bill Blood and Meeder for 7 years, doing insurance defense work and general private practice. Then opened his private practice in Sherman. He retired at age 72. I would now open up to anyone in the audience who would want to share a story about Clint Meeder. And while Judge Cass is coming up, I have just one vignette. Clint forever was a board member of the Chautauqua Abstract Company. And Clint forever would just simply say, "I'm a dirt lawyer. That's all I am." And frankly, wasn't interested in being interviewed. He just said, "I'm a dirt lawyer, I have nothing to say." That's the end of the story. But what memory he left was for those who attended Chautauqua Abstract board meetings. We'd have a nice lunch. We'd talk about whatever the nuances are of the title business, the title insurance business, Clint would add. But always at the end, there would be, "Does anybody want dessert?" And there would only be one person always, and that was Clint Meeder. He would raise his hand, and he'd want some peanut butter pie. And right then and there, it extended the meeting while we graciously watched him conclude that. But nevertheless, he was a professional pie eater. Not if he was like that at home, but that was a memory that will always stand with the Chautauqua Abstract Company, which has nothing to do with the law. It's just his culinary habits. So with that, Judge Cass.
Thank you. My name is Steve Cass, and so Robert H. Jackson was a nationally renowned country lawyer from Frewsburg, New York. Now, growing up in Frewsburg and growing up in the country, I was always on the lookout for a country lawyer. The problem is, what is a country lawyer? And you'll know that Robert H. Jackson went to Albany Law School for a year, and lucky for us, Albany Law Review has written an article which defines a country lawyer. It says everyone knows what a country lawyer looks like. He, that's what it says, and it's always a he, is a middle-aged or older and a vernacular mix of wisdom and good humor. He's a generalist in a small town, deeply connected to his community. He's trusted and respected, the person who is called upon when trouble threatens. In the early 1980s, when I first met Clint Meeder, I'd found my country lawyer. I didn't know he was a dirt lawyer, but I figured he was a country lawyer. And maybe it was because he had a big farm with big tractors and a barn and lots of land that I thought he was a country lawyer. Maybe it was because every time my dad and I would go fishing out in the Chautauqua Creek, as we would pass by the Meeder farm, my dad would say, "That's the Meeder farm. That's where Clint Meeder works and lives. And Clint takes care of everybody in Sherman." I knew Clint. I found him to be always polite and courteous. I found his legal work to be unparalleled. I dealt with him as an attorney, as a colleague, and later on when he appeared in court. He always had a Wall Street Journal tucked under his arm. He was always polite, like I said, and courteous. And if you think about it, Clint was a middle-aged or older, and a vernacular mix of wisdom and good humor. Clint was a generalist in a small town of Sherman, deeply connected to his community. Everybody knows the Meeders. He was trusted and respected, the person called upon when trouble threatened. I'm proud to have known Clint, the country lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Lynn?
Good morning. I'm Lynn Hartley, and I feel I am in a position where I was sort of in the generation gap between generations with gentlemen like Judge Willard Cass, Bill Blood, and Clint Meeder. He fit in that class very well. When I came back to Jamestown to practice in 1967, I had the chance to meet Clint along with many other attorneys that unfortunately are no longer with us. And I remember most all of them. Clint was a very gracious person, very humble, very accommodating person. I felt very privileged to have known him and had the chance to work with him. And I wish his family all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Anybody else who, in the audience who would like to speak concerning Clint Meeder? If not, do we have anybody online? Okay. With that, I'll draw closure to the celebration of the life of Clinton Meeder and talk about Thomas A. Dorey. Thomas A. Dorey of Celebration, Florida, formerly of Lakewood, New York, passed away on Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022, surrounded by his loving family after a lengthy battle with Parkinson's disease. Tom was born in Buffalo, New York on June 25th, 1950, to Arthur and Ruby Dorey. He was a 1968 graduate of Cardinal O'Hara High School in Tonawanda, New York. He attended Bucknell University and graduated from the University of Buffalo in 1972 with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. He went on to attend the University of Buffalo Law School, graduating in 1976 with a Juris Doctorate in law. He began his legal career with legal services in Dunkirk, New York, and went on to practice with the law firm of Goodell and Dorey. For most of his career, he was an attorney in the Social Services Department of Chautauqua County, as well as a United States bankruptcy trustee. Tom was a member of the Jamestown Bar Association. He loved to write, and he penned a book entitled The Life and Times of the Hotel Athenaeum. Tom was an avid athlete, enjoying pickleball, tennis, rowing, hiking, and bicycling. For many years, he helped raise money for cancer research by participating in the Ride for Roswell. Tom will be remembered as a loving husband and father. His children were his greatest pride and joy, and he was overjoyed to be a grandfather. Tom is survived by his wife of 44 years, Rose, and his children, Kimberly, Kevin, and grandson, Alexander Thomas Nevinger. By the way, just an aside, I bought this book specifically for everybody here to sign it. And then in turn, we'll give it to Rose, just as kind of an acknowledgement of our appreciation for Tom. So please do not leave without doing that. With that, I pause, and I have a couple of letters I would like to read. I am unable to be at Tom's memorial in person, but I wanted to offer a few words about my friend Tom Dorey. It's probably better that Greg is reading this to all of you, as I'm not sure I would be able to express all my thoughts in person without shedding some tears and getting overcome with emotion, as I am experiencing both of those while I sit at my computer typing. Tom was, in a word, genuine. I have so many great memories of Tom. We played golf together many times. His ability to play almost a full round of golf with only his irons earned him the nickname Iron Man, a moniker he wore with pride. When he retired, he wanted to stay in touch with his colleagues, and our friend Barb Woodrig would schedule periodic lunches with a number of our friends, and it was my honor and pleasure to act as Tom's chauffeur and transport him to many of those lunches. During those rides, Tom would tell me stories of his travels and adventures as a retiree and discuss his family. There is no doubt Tom loved his family, and his fondest memories were spending time traveling and visiting with his immediate and extended family. In presenting my memories of Tom, I must include his MVP status during many battles of the businesses. Tom rarely turned me down when I came to call and asked him to participate in the annual Battle of the Businesses. Tom has played in many events over the years, including softball, broomball, pool, and Scrabble. While our win in broomball in 2004 over our rivals Matco Tool has been labeled by YMCA staff as the second miracle on ice, second only to the USA hockey win over Russia in 1980, and which is indeed legendary. He played many years with Judge Joe Girassi. Tom and Judge Girassi were often the oldest competitors on the court and would often shock their much younger opponents with the skill and mastery of the game. In fact, Tom told me once, as he was leaving the court after soundly defeating two much younger challengers, he overheard them comment something to the effect that they had just been trounced by their grandfathers. The last few battles, Judge Girassi was unable to play, and Tom continued his dominance in pickleball with a new partner, Pat Slagle. The last year Tom played pickleball was 2019, and we again won the battle trophy. I could go on and recount many more memories of my friend, but I know there are many who likely wish to do so, and so I will keep my comments brief. Tom was and is beloved. I miss him, but I find comfort in my belief that he is now in heaven, demonstrating his Iron Man skills on a heavenly golf course and continuing to dominate in pickleball. Submitted in fondest memory, Marilyn Fiore Lehman. Good morning. I'm unable to attend today's memorial service, Tom, but I wanted to share some memories of him. I first met Tom and his wife Rose while volunteering at a campaign for Mike Bluth's run for DA in the 1980s. We had so much fun. Most significant memory of our friendship was Tom's ability to tell a story. He was a great storyteller. I remember imagining him recounting his train trip at around 10 from Buffalo to Cleveland with his fathers to see the Yankees play. Tom described his excitement on the train as he walked from car to car, and how surprised he was when he opened the door to the third car and found the Yankees baseball team in uniform hanging out in the car. One of the team players said, "Come on in, kid." He described how he got to shake every player's hand and sit with them for a while. His story touched my heart, knowing how it must have felt being able to meet your favorite baseball team players. Tom told me he came to Chautauqua County when he found a job for a front desk clerk at the Athenaeum Hotel in Chautauqua Institution during the summer for college break. The job came with a private apartment, which turned out to be the greatest job experience he remembered. Imagine him spending the summer at the Athenaeum. Over the years, I was fortunate enough to see Tom and Rose have two fine children, Kim and Kevin. Tom was always sharing stories of the children's adventures and how proud he was of them. Another memory I have about Tom was when I was volunteering at a spaghetti dinner fundraiser when a friend accidentally spilled a plate of spaghetti down his back. Tom handled the situation with his usual grace and just sat quietly with a smile. My favorite of all memories is the relationship between Ned Barone and Tom. Wherever Tom was, Ned wasn't far behind. They used to play Jake and Elwood at their Blues Brothers parties, and they were really good. They had so much fun together. Personally, Tom was very helpful during my legal career, and I was grateful to have him in my life. He had a kind and gentle soul. Tom will be missed by many. He touched a lot of lives. I will also remember the friendship me and my husband shared. My husband so enjoyed Tom's company and loved snow skiing with him. My deepest sympathy goes out to Rose and the children. Rose stood steadfast with such strength, caring for Tom until the end. Her example of commitment and love made me hope that I will have as much strength should I ever be faced as a caregiver with such difficult illness. Rose was so compassionate, and her love for Tom was evident in their relationship as his symptoms became more debilitating. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the memories. Barbara Woodring. And we also have, and I'll put in the record, a few other attorneys who just sent their condolences to the family members. With that, I'll pause and open up the mic for anybody who would share to comment with regarding the life of Thomas Dorey.
I want to speak before Ned first.
Since there is a pause, Phil Calla is coming.
And I hope you won't disappoint Ned. Hi, Phil Calla, and I remember Tom chiefly for two reasons. One, his generosity, and I'll expound on that a little bit. And two, the most unique sense of humor of anyone I've ever known. And I always have appreciated humor. So with regard to his generosity, occasionally I'd have a client that I couldn't refuse to represent in support court. And I had no business being there, and it was probably, would have been a disservice to the client, except for Tom's generosity, because he would provide guidance prior to court appearance, afterwards, during, and he was always available to basically give you a seminar, bring you up to speed, make sure you knew what you should know to be there. The sense of humor, he had a unique combination of insight into human nature and a wit that was as dry as a cracker. And I wish I could think of some actual examples of that. I'm sorry I can't, and maybe Ned can help me again. Ned, I hope I'm not embarrassing you or putting you on the spot, but I got to assume you're going to get up and say some words. Ned? Ned here? Oh, okay. His delivery was just low-key, very often softly spoken, but he would say things that would take you by surprise, and you'd find yourself bursting out in laughter because he just nailed it. So that's all I have to say, and like everybody who knew Tom, I'm going to miss him. Thank you.
Greg Edwards.
Phil, I'm going to try and help you out. I'm not and never will be in the National Comedy Center. But I've got to tell you one that I remember distinctly. I had a chance to practice a great deal with Tom as our paths crossed as when I was public defender and later in the general practice I had. But I can distinctly recall being up in Mayville. And it was a break in the action up there, and we were just standing in the hallway. And to your point of sense of wit and delivery, we were standing there just talking about the events of the day, or I can't remember exactly what it was. But he turned to me and he said, Greg, you know, being on assistance is a lot like being a millionaire. I said, Tom, what are you talking about? And he said, no, really, think about it. He said, if you're a millionaire, you can go where you want, when you want, do pretty much what you want. And there's always people around. And that's great, right? I said, well, yeah, sure. He said, well, think about if you're on assistance. He said, if you're on assistance, you go pretty much where you want, when you want, do what you want. Inevitably, there's somebody there that wants to have sex with you. And he delivered that just so dryly, and I just remember that, and maybe he shared that comment with somebody else in the room, but I don't think there's a person who's ever met Tom that didn't immediately gravitate towards him as a person, his quality of his character, his commitment to the people that he represented, or his commitment as a judge, and he was always fair-handed. I'll miss him for all of that.
Your Honor.
Grace Hanlon. I just want to expand on what Phil said. I was lucky enough to play golf with Iron Man too. And I just want to talk about his generosity and sense of humor too. When in the early 90s, I was a part-time ADA and I had my own practice part-time, and I was in sport court quite a bit, and Tom Dorey talked me out of doing hearings that I had no business doing because I was going to lose. And he knew I was going to lose, and he always, he would come out in the hallway and say, Grace, what's your plan on this case? And I would lay out my plan, shake his head. No, you don't want to do that. You want to do this. And he was always right. And I learned after a while to take his advice and do what he said. And in 1995, I left the DA's office to go work for Fezzik, Laumer, and D'Angelo. And Tom and his henchman, Ned Barone, organized a party for me. And they had a limo, and there were a few of us, and we were in a few bars in Fredonia. And we were in the back of this bar, and it was filled with college students. And Tom and Ned made arrangements for now Sheriff Quattrone and Jim Rensel to come into the bar and arrest me in the back of the bar. And they came in the back of the bar and arrested me and walked me out to the front, and they had me do field sobriety tests in the front of this bar. And the whole front of the bar is all windows. And all I remember is all the college students coming to the front to watch me do these field sobriety tests. But I also remember Tom Dorey's face, laughing hysterically. And he had a great sense of humor. He was a kind human being. He was a wonderful man. And I was lucky enough to call him a friend. Thank you.
Judge, what was your test result? Judge?
Hello, Judith Clare. I'd like to talk about Tom as an attorney and the fact that he appeared in front of me literally hundreds and hundreds of times over the years. We've already heard about his humor. He had a wit that was so dry and ironic and could be very sarcastic, and you never knew quite what to expect. As a lawyer, he cared about his work. He was always on time. He always tried hard. I don't think I ever had a problem with him, ever that I can remember. I loved the stories that he used to tell, and he would get quite involved in some of them. And he had an interest in odd intellectual things, I guess is what I would say. I don't know quite the words to use, but he would at times go off on a topic when we were sitting around perhaps waiting on a pretrial for clients to negotiate or whatever, and he would just pursue something, some obscure topic, and be quite knowledgeable about it. And we would all sit there listening and be quite fascinated by whatever he was addressing. I also have a couple of Tom Dorey stories that are quite hilarious, but I don't feel comfortable telling them. So I'll have to save those for another occasion. But in any case, I did want to pay tribute to him for his legal skills and remember all that he did over the years to help children and families in Chautauqua County. Thank you.
With that lead-in, Judge Clare, you are our principal speaker at the Jamestown Bar Association Summer Picnic, unrecorded. Anybody else who would like to say something on behalf of Tom? John?
John Samuelson. I've been privileged to practice in the same bar with Tom for over 40 years. I think we all agree he was diligent, competent, and most importantly, probably the most congenial fellow attorney that we have in our bar. Every case I had with him was a pleasure. And as has been also noted, he was an avid athlete, as I saw when I competed with him in the Battle of the Businesses. I still have the image of him being the last man standing on our team when 6 opposing players were hurling balls at him. He was just a joy to be with, and we're fortunate that he chose to practice law with us, and I will miss him.
Several people standing while they're walking down. Just a note for those people who were not in court a lot with Tom Dorey. He was a go-to person for all of us who stumbled on occasionally into bankruptcy matters. And for that wild world, which we had no knowledge of, there was only one go-to person in the entire Bar Association, and that was Tom Dorey. He was on our speed dial. I know mine. Andy?
Thanks, Greg. So Tom, as you know, was partners with my dad, Goodell and Dorey. And when I came back to Jamestown, I didn't know anything about Tom other than he was my dad's partner, which was itself a remarkable accomplishment for anybody to be. And it was an interesting contrast in characters because my father, for those of you who knew him, was very much for the underdog, very driven. At one time had one of the largest practices in Jamestown with like 5 or 6 paralegals, and he was like the orchestra conductor. And then you had Tom Dorey. Now Tom had the nicest office in the building, with a beautiful window and a little bit of a balcony, and he was laid back and quiet. So you had the first floor with my father, who you could hear on the second floor, and you had Tom Dorey, who you couldn't hear when you were on the second floor. And as Greg mentioned, Tom at that time focused on bankruptcy and was absolutely an expert. So my involvement with Tom was on the professional side because I'm not athletic. And so I'm not quite sure what irons mean, but that was not my forte. Although I did have the good fortune of rowing with Tom. Now I would come to row right after work. So I'd take off my coat and tie, but I would have pretty much what I'm wearing today, you know, khaki pants, white shirt. And Tom, of course, was dressed appropriately. Short sleeve shirt, shorts, and would gently chide me if he'd been overdressed. And I would remind him that he and the other members of the rowing team dressed like slobs, which he took in stride. But two other things. First, I think I share this with all of you. If I ever needed legal advice, dealing with bankruptcy or social services, I knew I could pick up the phone and I could go to the bank with whatever Tom Dorey told me. Low-key, professional, absolutely a lawyer's lawyer in every respect. Now, I was a little bit upset this week when I mentioned to my wife that I was coming here for this memorial service. I shared with her I was very disappointed I couldn't go to his funeral because I was in Albany. And my wife said, Tom Dorey, gosh, he's younger than you, wasn't he? No. He was several years older. But one last thing. Have any of you heard him raise his voice in anger? I'm looking out of the audience and seeing no response, other than Judge Claire. I talked to Tom once when he was really, really angry. And it was a bankruptcy case. Client came in, wanted to claim bankruptcy. Tom reviewed their assets and pointed out they had more assets than liabilities, so they just needed to sell some of their assets and they wouldn't qualify for bankruptcy. I ran into Tom about a year later, and the client had filed bankruptcy. And not surprisingly, had sold some of the assets and not disclosed it. And Tom was really angry. And didn't raise his voice, but in that quiet, gentle way said, I'm glad I'm not representing him, basically. So Tom left a lot of great memories with me. What a gentleman. What a gentleman, and what a lawyer. It was a privilege knowing Tom. Thanks.
Pat?
Thank you. Patrick Slagle. I got to know Tom in bankruptcy court. I was working for Law New York at the time and didn't know much about bankruptcy, didn't know how I got admitted to bankruptcy court. I still question that sometimes. But Tom was a generous soul. If you practice bankruptcy, you know how important it is to file on time to preserve your client's rights. I think even more important is to file so you got Tom as your Chapter 7 trustee. Numerous times, Tom would pull me aside and give me a tip. If I needed a Form G, I didn't even know what that was. Tom would pull out his briefcase and says, just sign this and file this. Great guy, always willing to help out. Privileged to have learned how to play pickleball from Tom and Judge Dorey. I thought I was an athlete at that time, and got on the court with Tom, and he just started jumping all over that court, and it was unbelievable watching him play, and it was quite a privilege to play many years of pickleball for JBA. Won a few of them, and it was a great time. And just Tom will be sorely missed. And thank you.
Again, Mike, why don't you come first, then Ned will let you come. Mike? While he's coming up here, just a note that in the submission from Maryland, I did get 2 photos, pickleball photos, of Tom with Judge Gerasi and Tom with you, Pat. And so I'll make sure they somehow get part of the transcript. I'll leave that to Jerry Lenicky to figure out. Mike?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Bluth. I met Tom in 1978 at the Legal Services Office in Dunkirk. It was my first job after graduating from law school. And it happened to be a tumultuous office in the way it was run, as some people here may remember. But Tom was a calm and steady presence in that office to keep things going and keep the cases going as well. But that sense of humor also came through, because here I was, my first job, shortly after I started, and I'm sitting and talking with Tom at Tom's desk, and Tom said, well, I'm ready for when Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes comes in to do an investigation of this office. I said, really? What? He pulled out a paper grocery bag from his desk, put it over his head, and said, I'm ready. I came to respect Tom as a lawyer, and Tom came to be my friend, and was my friend for, now it's 44 years. I had such respect in his ability as a lawyer that when I had a family member who needed a referral to an attorney, I sent him to Tom. Even after that legal services office, at another time when our careers intersected was, as Andy mentioned a few moments ago, in the Goodell and Dorey building. Some may not remember, but for a year or so, I rented an office in that building and was independent of the firm, but worked with John and Tom, and I was there when Andy came back. So Tom and his wife Rose, as many of you may know, were the proud parents of 2 adopted children, Kimberly and Kevin. Tom kept that spirit of what led him to adopt 2 children into his career with the county. He was extremely dedicated to protecting children. He was extremely motivated, and that was a compelling factor in his life. It is just so sad that this horrendous progressive disease has now deprived this bar of a great member, has deprived his family of a husband, father, and grandfather, and has now taken from me my good friend.
Thank you, Mike. Ned Brown?
I'm glad I waited until everyone else had a chance to speak, because I think that everyone's really talked about the things that are important, that everyone knows about Tom. But quite frankly, I also, without question, I think it's kind of ironic that I'm standing here today saying a few words about Tom. And what I admired most about Tom, because we had so many frank discussions, and we truly were. Tom was, without question, my very best friend. And I can't even begin to tell you the discussions that Tom and me would have that really kind of, I look back and it was pretty amazing. But Tom always referred to me as his pain in the ass little brother that he never had. And, and it was. I did everything I could to irritate this poor guy, and he just kept coming back for more. I just couldn't figure it out. He was a glutton for punishment. But he truly was a dear friend. But we used to talk, and, Tom was, as everyone's already said, very quiet gentleman. And I never, in all the years I was with him, as Andy pointed out, I never heard him raise his voice. I never heard him be disrespectful or mean to anyone. We were opposite ends of the spectrum, and perhaps maybe that's why we clicked, and that's why we were always together. We fed off of one another. But Tom always used to tell me, I've got an entire list. And I think he actually did have a list. Rose sent me a package the other day, and it didn't contain the list, but I think at one time he had it. And he kept telling me, we never referred to each other as Ned or Tom. It was Barone and Dorey. And he'd look at me and said, Barone, you're not going to believe the things I'm going to talk about at your memorial with the Jamestown Bar Association. And I used to look at him and I said, well, I just don't think, Tom, you would stoop that low. And quite frankly, I think that you'd be too embarrassed to say the things you want to talk about. So, unfortunately, I find myself here today talking, and when I saw Judge Hartley come up and Judge Clare, I'm not going to really, I don't want to say much about our friendship or his friendship with the rest of the bar, but I will say this, that he truly did, he enjoyed each and every one of you. And I know that. We talked truthfully. We didn't really discuss, if you know me, we really didn't discuss legal issues. When we were sitting around doing things, it was crazy shit. And it continued that way all the time. And, Rose used to tell me, Ned, he lives vicariously through you. So I always felt as though I was doing him a service. But and I hope that he finally realized that. But he, he did really enjoy everybody here in this room. And I looked at everybody as you were coming in, as you were coming up. And if there's one thing he enjoyed about the Bar Association was the friendship that he formed with all of you. He really did. Paul Andrews, sitting up here next to him, and he loved Paul. And he loved the idea that he would be able to, he became a bicyclist, or I don't know what you referred to it. He got me to do it a few times, and it was for the cancer raising, for the fundraisers in Buffalo, we'd always do it. And it was, I didn't like to do that stuff, but, he admired Paul and everything he did. And what you all talked about, pickleball, Pat Slagle. I mean, he loved playing pickleball with Judge Gerasi. And again, all these things we did, we go back, think about it with the North and the county bar picnics. You remember those, right? And you mentioned Tony Spann passing away. Remember we used to have the softball games at his lake property? Phil, you remember. I think Judge Cass, you remember, we have the picture in Judge Lamancuso's office of the softball teams. He loved all that. He lived for that. That's what he was about. You know, he liked the balance of things, and he cherished and he relished the opportunity to be part of the battle of the businesses with everyone else here. That's what it was about. And he was athletic, and he enjoyed everything that he did. But beyond that, the one thing I wanted to make sure I talked about or mentioned was I came to realize a couple things, and seeing Judge Clare here today reminded me of one of them, and Judge Hartley. And Judge Hartley, you might remember, you were stuck with me and Dorey back in our, Andy Goodell, God bless you. Andy's younger brother, Rick, and me are very good friends. We always were. And he was close with Tom, too. And if you remember, Andy, it was I referred to us as the three-legged dog. Me, Dorey, and Woodrick. And it was usually the three of us. And we managed, like a three-legged dog, to be able to get from point A to point B. I don't know how we did it together, but we worked it. It was kind of weird, but we figured it out. And Andy was kind enough to appoint us in the county, with county attorney positions. Do you remember, Andy? And you were county exec at the time. I went to the county attorney's office, and Tom and Woodrick went to DSS, and they became the attorneys for Department of Social Services. Judge Hartley was the family court judge at the time. So it was me representing the county on custody, visitation, things like that. And Dorey and Woodrick were over in the DSS. So we were with Judge Hartley. We spent a ton of time with Judge Hartley all those years. But I do know that he did a lot of good, and he was absolutely a credit to the Jamestown Bar and to the legal community in Chautauqua County. He did so much for the kids and the children in this county. He took his job very serious. He was brilliant at what he did. The bankruptcy matters, there was no one better, as everyone's already indicated. He was an absolute expert. And we couldn't have had a better attorney that worked with us, a better friend. And again, like everyone said, he was always there to help you. It didn't matter what it was. But Tom's going to be missed. And unfortunately, like Mike Bluth and me talked so much up at the funeral in Buffalo, but you know, unfortunately, we all wait till it's too late sometimes. To talk about things. So one thing he'd want is, you know, he enjoyed being able to go to another attorney and help them and be there for them. And I think that's what it's about. And I think that's what we're missing among a lot of us today, is being able to reach out and knowing that you can reach out to another attorney and get help. Just ask. I mean, that's what I think we're all here for. It's for each other. And there's nothing to gain by trying to get advantage over someone else, right? It's about being there for each other and being there for one another. And I think if we want to really honor Tom's memory and what he was all about, it's to help one another and to let each other know that we're there for them if they have issues or they have problems. Just being someone you can talk to. And don't wait. I mean, if you want to get together, and again, you know, I'm the biggest culprit. And I saw Paul walk in today, and my first thought was, oh, Jesus, I was supposed to call Paul for lunch like a year ago. So, so you know, that's really what it's about. And look, if there's one thing I can say is really to all of you, thank you so much for being good friends to Tom, because he loved it, and he loved all of you, and he loved spending the time with each and every one of you. So thanks very much.
As Ned is sitting, oops, there we go. As Ned is sitting down, I want him to know that Rose sent you a package of virtually everything except the list, which I have, which will be part of the transcript for those that can grab it and reach it. You'll get to know all of that. And by the way, Paul Andrews is available for lunch today. Anybody else who would like to speak on behalf of Tom? With that, we will stand adjourned, and we will then have this transcribed and delivered to Clint's family and Tom's family as well. And thank everybody. And please, I saw this, please sign this. This is going to be given to Rose. And I saw this done at Robert Jackson's funeral, that the entire Bar Association signed a book of Robert Jackson's, it was a posthumously printed book. And so I would hope those that are here would just pause. And there's 3 kind of almost semi-blank pages. Just if you want to sign a note, fine. If you want to just put your name, fine. Either way. But do that. I will leave it right here. Thank you very much for coming.